Today in the EU, migration concerns take center stage at European Council summit. EU migration policy will be at the forefront of the European Council summit today. Member states across the Union are clashing over what direction EU migration policy should take. From return hubs to asylum seekers' rights and third-country bilateral agreements, divergent proposals are likely to complicate efforts to take any steps forward, given that unanimity is necessary to pass any procedure at EUCO. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. I'm joined in the studio by Sarantis Michalopoulos, senior editor here at Euractiv. Hi, Sarantis.
Good morning, Giada.
Today marks the beginning of the European Council summit, and I was just reading an article a few days ago about how talks will revolve around migration, and migration. Now, is that true? And what about migration policy will member states be discussing exactly?
Migration will definitely take center stage in the discussions during the summits.
So that's true.
Yeah, this is true. But it's not certain at all that we're going to have concrete decisions in the final conclusions.
And why is that?
It's because according to the information we have so far, it seems that the member states want to use this summit as an opportunity to satisfy domestic audiences and essentially address the rising trend of far-right in their electorate, rather than come up with tangible results for the future of the EU migration policy.
Well, at the same time, there seems to be some political will to make concrete changes, like going back to the Dublin regulation, which determines which EU member state is responsible for the examination of an application for asylum, and that should be the first country you get to. Now, what countries are keen to change the Dublin 3?
For instance, we know that Germany is pushing to include in the final conclusions a reference to the proper implementation of the Dublin 3 regulation until the new Migration Pact takes effect in 2026. In a few words, Germany is telling Italy and Greece, two frontline countries, that practically they don't prevent asylum seekers from going to Germany. On the other hand, countries like Greece, diplomats tell us that they don't want any reference of the Dublin 3 regulation in the final text. They believe that if we open the discussion about who implements correctly the Dublin 3 regulation and who doesn't, it's like opening the Pandora's box. From their part, the Greeks basically say that Germany hasn't received any refugee on a voluntary basis, according to the Dublin regulations, since 2020. Greece also says, in order to satisfy its own domestic audience, that it needs a clear European message for the protection of the external borders of the European Union. This also includes fences in the case of Greece, but we all know that the European Commission doesn't support, opposes funding with EU money the construction of fences on a member state level. And there is a political reason for that, and Greeks are super aware of this, because if the Commission says yes now, it practically legitimizes Viktor Orban's request years ago to use EU funds in order to build fences on the Hungarian territory. On the other hand, the most extreme example is Poland and Hungary. Both countries reject receiving any refugees. They don't want a solution in this summit on migration. In practice, they disregard the EU law. If you put all this together, you realize that it's highly unlikely that we will have concrete results unless something super surprising takes place during the dinner tonight.
It's interesting to see how, on one hand, there is a more and more unified vision on migration, a harder stance on migration, but then when it comes to implementation of it, member states are extremely divided. One point being the early implementation of the Migration Pact. Now, who is pushing forward for this implementation and who is against?
Germany, Spain, and France have publicly said that they want an earlier implementation of the new Migration Pact, although we also know that there are many other member states who agree. However, we have to point out that in practice, I really don't see how this could change the current state of play when it comes to migration. Because under the new migration pact, the first-line countries like Greece, like Italy, like Spain, will still be responsible to process asylum requests, and the other member states are not obliged at all to take in any refugees from the first-line countries. The new element that the new migration pact will bring is the so-called mandatory solidarity.
And what does mandatory solidarity mean in practice?
In practice, mandatory solidarity means that other countries will still be free to decide whether to take in refugees from first-line countries or not, or just give first-line countries money. So they're not obliged at all. It's not mandatory for them to receive refugees from the first-line countries. And my question is, what is going to happen, considering the current circumstances? What is going to happen in case that we have an escalation in the Middle East? We're talking about thousands of refugees who will try to reach Europe. How could the new migration pact, in this case, help first-line countries address this potential situation?
Indeed, that's a burning question for many as we watch civilians flee bombardments in Lebanon and Palestinian territories. Their rights, the rights of asylum seekers, are protected under international law, but it seems that member states are keen to renegotiate the terms of what protection looks like. Can you tell us more?
The Polish government made a decision this week. It surprised Europe, Brussels in particular. However, some others, like the German main opposition Christian Democrat Party, CDU, agreed with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. But we have to say that it's again the same discussion. Tusk is feeling the pressure of the main opposition, of the hard-right main opposition Peace Party. Tusk also said that he will not respect the future migration pact that will take effect in 2026. This is not exactly what Tusk promised before the Polish elections. The EU, as I said before, has legal concerns about Poland's move. We will see what will happen, but again, it's another example that everyone at this summit at least is trying to score individual points to satisfy domestic audiences. I don't see any practical solution coming up out of this.
Mm-hmm. Von der Leyen has voiced one of the most promising ideas being return hubs in a very similar fashion to what Italy has done with Albania. Now, does this mean that von der Leyen is taking a page out of Meloni's book? Has Meloni proved that she is the European problem solver when it comes to migration policy?
First of all, we have to clarify that the vast majority of diplomats we spoke to, they don't see, any particular decision regarding the so-called return hubs at this summit in the final conclusions, at least not for now. Overall, the return hubs idea, we have to understand it, is not solving the problem as such. It's outsourcing the problem. The problem will still be there, close, but outside the EU territory. And that's why it's highly political as an idea. There are reasons for this. The pro-EU mainstream parties have realized that, the EU citizens, to a large extent, at the last EU elections, they voted having in mind migration. It's not secret anymore. Now the mainstream parties are adjusting their agenda. They want to put through this, an end to the rise of the far right, which, without question, has been monopolizing the migration topic for a long time. In a nutshell, Meloni did not provide Europe with a magic solution. The timing of the idea was politically good, given that after the elections, Meloni is considered the bridge, one could say, or the communication channel between the EU center-right, the EPP, and the forces on the right, the hard-right ECR, or even the far-right Patriots for Europe. So Meloni knows that some people want her to play this role, and for now she has been doing that in the right way according to her.
Yes, although there is some criticism from other member states. Greece Immigration Minister Nikos Panagotopoulos just yesterday said how he was skeptical of the Italy-Albanian bilateral agreement and said that he was hoping for a European joint plan. Anyways, I do agree with you when you say we're outsourcing the problem. At the same time, that seems to be largely the direction we're headed towards, especially in the form of bilateral agreements with their countries. Let us think of the EU-Turkey agreement. Recent investigations, however, have exposed breaches in human rights occurring in the country. Do you think that the EU will continue to strike deals with their countries even when guarantees of human rights protection are not necessarily there?
It depends. We need to see whether these partnership agreements you are referring to, the countries that we signed this agreement essentially, because if we're talking about Tunisia or Turkey, they are not the root of the problem, they are transit countries. So these countries receive migrants and refugees from neighboring countries. So it's not the root of the problem, it's the transit countries we're dealing with here. In the case of Turkey, I hope we know that it hosts already 3.2 million refugees from Syria. There is a possibility of wider conflict in the Middle East region. We already know that more than 100,000 refugees from Lebanon have crossed the Syrian border. And it's not unlikely that we will see refugee waves toward Turkey. And here I think there are two solutions that Europe is exploring. One solution could be for Europe to keep close ties with Turkey. It seems so far. In order to keep these refugees in Syria. But this also means that we need to collaborate with Assad. And we also know that there are some member states, including Cyprus, that is pushing for relaxing the EU sanctions against the Assad regime exactly for this reason.
And you said there's a second scenario.
A second solution is basically we implement what von der Leyen said at her letter earlier this week toward the member states when she mentioned that we have to fully implement the 2016 EU-Turkey statement. This deal basically means that Turkey has to receive back refugees from Greece. This deal has never been implemented. So my question is, why are you bringing it back now? Is it related to the Middle East conflict? Is there something that the Europeans fear and they don't say out loud? In any event, it's pretty clear, based on their public statements, it's pretty clear that Turkey will never accept having return hubs on its territories and will never collaborate with the EU on migration unless it gets political benefits. This is what the past has taught us pretty clear, and it's not unlikely that Turkey will use it as a political leverage.
So I think we've covered pretty much everything that's on the EUCO agenda for today that we know of. The rights of asylum seekers, the implementation of the Migration Pact, return hubs. What do you see coming out of this council?
Personally, judging from the discussions I had with several EU diplomats, I think that we are moving toward the direction of a simple sentence that there was a strategic discussion over migration. However, we still need to see the political willingness of the member states, what kind of message essentially they want to send after this summit. But I also see that there is a growing number of member states that they want to basically understand each other's position and come up with concrete results in December. We will see.
Thank you, Sarantis. I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This podcast was produced by Miriam Sanchez Tejada, Charles Cohen, and I. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.